Today, I received a submission from a viewer about a personal experience that happened in Berlin. Back in the late 2000s, I was in my early 20s and living happily for a few years as a broke expat in Berlin. One of my roommates who was from the UK and I were out late-ish seeing a band play maybe around midnight or 1. And afterwards we were headed home, walking through a relatively central but quiet part of the city towards a subway station entrance. We were in high spirits after a couple drinks and a fun night out. Not too drunk, just a little tipsy, and we were laughing and chatting, probably somewhat loudly, as we headed arm in arm towards the subway entrance, which was ahead of us down at the far end of a long, quiet street. It was late October, early November, and still warm enough for it to feel nice to walk outside, and the misty air hung in yellow halos under the streets. Just as a little gust of wind blew some leaves across the pavement in front of us, we both became aware of a figure walking ahead of us in the mist. From the back it appeared to be an older woman, stooped over, carrying bags in each hand, and walking with a very pronounced limp, sort of dragging one of her legs along behind her. We were speaking English, and nearly about to pass around her on the sidewalk, when the woman cried out rather exaggerated in English, but with a thick German accent. "Oh, help. Won't anybody help me?" She didn't sound frightened or worried so much as deeply demanding, and her tone of voice suggested she expected to be helped. My roommate tried to keep us moving ahead past her, but I softened and slowed down my pace. Because after all, this was an elderly woman, carrying bags late at night, and she clearly couldn't walk very well. I asked her what she needed help with, and she said, "It's my leg, help me carry the bags." I live just over there, and she nodded towards an apartment building entryway a half a block up the street. My inner good Samaritan instincts kicked in and I responded automatically, "Oh, of course we'll help you." My roommate seemed decidedly less enthused for some reason, but begrudgingly followed me as we each grabbed one of the woman's bags and carted them to the doorstep up the street. As the woman's face came into sharper relief underneath a nearby street twide, I realized that she looked txactl, while like a witch out of a German fairy tale. Then posture, a large wart on her nose, grayish-white straggly hair, and she was wearing dark wool clothing with a hood. I was honestly taken aback by her appearance and nearly gasped out loud, but again, wanting to be polite, I pushed this to the back of my mind. Who cares what she looks like? I told myself. She's just an elderly lady who needs our help. When we arrived at her building's doorstep, the entryway door was surprisingly ajar, not the norm at all in the neighborhood we were in, as she pushed it open easily, suddenly seeming to possess more strength than she had had moments before, and leaned forward to hold it for open me so that I could go in first and she would be behind me. She gestured up a dark and dingy flight of stairs, and breathed just up the stairs. I froze in my tracks for a second in the doorway, as my tipsy 23-year-old brain tried to puzzle it out. Logically, the polite thing to do would be to carry the bag up the stairs for this woman, right? But then again, all the hairs were standing up on the back of my neck, and the building's hallway and narrow staircase in the dim fluorescent yellow light looked awfully foreboding. I could just make out a doorway at the top of the stairs on the right-hand side that was also slightly ajar, leading into an apartment. An air of intensely stale, musty smoke wafted down the stairs, and then there was the tone of stark urgency in the woman's voice as she urged me to step fully inside and get up the stairs as quickly as possible. If I had to describe her tone, it wasn't too far from the voice of a cartoon villain rubbing their hands together while hatching a nefarious plan. As I stood in the entryway, tipsily trying to weigh the very bad feeling in the pit of my stomach against my lifelong fear of being impolite, I actually giggled at how absurdly horror movie-esque the moment felt, so much so that it couldn't be a real threat, right? It was too spot on, so I must be imagining it. Fortunately, my roommates, who had seen more shit in her life than I had at that point, literally yelled out, "Oh, HELL no," hooked her arm into mine, pulled me out the door and down the street as quickly as possible. The old woman yelled disappointed lie after us as my roommate whisked me across the street and down the subway stairs, back into the safety of a warm, brightly lit public space full of people. Once we had safely escaped, my roommate shared the two things that had set off definitive alarm bells in her head. One, she was certain that the woman's limp wasn't there initially as she walked ahead of us, and it had only appeared as we got closer to her. And two, in her words, as you stood in the doorway, I suddenly knew that she had a creepy adult son waiting for us at the top of the stairs who was going to chain you to her bed. Perhaps it was just our fanciful imaginations, but I have always felt grateful to my roommate's instincts for keeping us away from whatever was at the top of those stairs. To this day, the contributor is still glad that he made this decision. He couldn't help but ask me at the end, Tell me, if I really went in at that time, would I still be alive to submit to you now?